Well, the wait is over, and we have now put the Daytona 500 weekend behind us. What a weekend it was as we welcome you to episode 4 of the Tune Up. We're so glad that you all have joined us once again. And of course, my name is Zach Tefelsky. Zachary MT is my YouTube channel. I'm the host of the show. I'm joined by my frequent panelist. And as we see here today, we've got it organized as Marcus Vander Lee. He sits above me in the voice call. Derek Smith sits to his left. And then last but not least, Cody Sill slotted in the bottom left today. Well, like we said, we are glad that you have joined us. We've got a great show ahead and perhaps one of our biggest shows all season long. I mean, probably has to be. I mean, after all, we are a NASCAR centric show, obviously not a NASCAR exclusive, but when you are about to recap the biggest race of the NASCAR season, I think you probably have to call it the biggest show. Hopefully that reflects on what we produce here today. Glad we have got some viewers once again. I mean, I've talked about it every single show. I'm just so grateful that we've had a consistent audience ever since episode 1. It's honestly been uh, more than I would have had expectations for. We're always appreciative of our audience. Hello to Cole Berna and Marcus, your father in the chat as
Yeah.
well. We love our
Yep.
audience.
Hi,
So,
Dad.
yes, indeed. How about we run down the show before we get into today? Quick note, I will say my fault. I had some issues with the graphics today. We're going to debut new graphics as we have a new show logo. Same logo, just new colors. And unfortunately, today that means we're not going to have a news bulletins switching throughout the show. It'll be this welcome bulletin for the whole show. So apologies on my behalf. I'll do better next episode. Anyways, let's run down what we're discussing today. Starting off, we're going to get into the primary segment. That is the Daytona 500 discussion, but not just the 500. We're going to discuss all of Speedweeks. Of course, that's all commenced since episode 3, and it starts with none other than Wednesday qualifying. We'll quickly discuss that. We'll also discuss the duels. That was on Thursday. And then we'll talk about Friday, the truck race headlining Friday's activities. And then Saturday, the day we had 2 races, ARC first and then Xfinity, and then we're dedicating half of the 40 minutes I've set aside for the Daytona discussion. Half of it will be just for the main event on Sunday. Of course, that's our headlining segment. That's what we'll get into first. After that, we'll be rating the race, our continual rate system as produced by Dar. We'll bring it up once again for the second time this year. We had the chance to rate the class, but now we're in the regular season. We're going to rate the Daytona 500 with our rating scale, thanks to Dar. And then we're going to review our Daytona race picks, the ones that we made in episode 3. We're going to see who did good and who did not so good. And after that, this is the part that's going to be exciting because we're going to take a look at the Fantasy League. We have standings officially updated after week 1. And let me just first say, shout out to everyone that joined. We had such a good number of users join us. It says 10 members, and that's just after uh, putting that out in the last episode. I honestly said I should have advertised it better. I was hoping I'd make a video on it, and that just wasn't the case that I got to. I'll still continue to try and advertise it when we get to that segment in the show. I'll remind everyone of the password if anyone wants to join because I don't think it locks during the season. I think we answered that question last time. And once we get past the fantasy segment, we are going to look towards Cody Sill as we bring back Turning My Wrenches. We're going to hear what's turning Cody's wrenches today after the Daytona weekend. And then we'll shift gears. We're going to look towards this Sunday and we're going to preview the Atlanta race weekend ahead for NASCAR Race 2 of the season. We're going to preview that, give some of our expectations, and most importantly, we're going to make our race picks. After that, we're going to look back to Cody. He's going to once again give us some of the quick rundown and latest happenings from his point of view in the dirt racing world. And then we're going to look to Derek Smith. F1 season, of course, hasn't started yet, but Derek today has some F1 news he wants to quickly open a discussion on. We'll look to him for that. And home stretch of the show here, we'll, of course, wrap up with some chat room open discussion. That's where we encourage you to stick around. Send your questions in. We will literally talk with you guys. We are trying to be as personal as possible with our audience every single show. That's really the motto of the tune-up. So you can send in your questions ahead of time, and eventually we're going to try and get to all of them. That's what we allot the chat room open discussion for, and that's what we end the show with. That's where we'll wrap it up, and so that's an outlook at our hour and a half, relatively give or take, that we'll spend together today. But glad I could run that down once again. Welcome in everyone that's watching with us. We've got about 10 viewers here. Welcome Ace King. I see you in the chat as well. Thanks for joining along. And without further ado, we might as well get to the headlining segment, guys, and that none other than the biggest race, the biggest week in stock car auto racing, that being Daytona. And it started hot on Wednesday. We had quite frankly, the most interesting qualifying session you could ask for in recent memory in Daytona, just because of the amount of open cars. Lots of drivers jostling for unguaranteed spots in the race. A lot of big names, former Cup champions, former Indy 500 champions, like Elio Castroneves, the four-time winner of that race, who didn't race his way in. He fell back on a provisional. We're going to start off with that. And shall we, guys? I mean, Cody, let me look to you because you were always excited for the start of Speedweeks, which now ever since COVID kicks off with qualifying, which is on a Wednesday night. And Cody, is there anything that stood out to you? I know you are perhaps the biggest junior motorsports fan on the panel here, and you were very happy to see Justin Allgaier make it in. But thoughts from qualifying?
Oh yeah, qualifying. It was really fun to watch this year. There's a lot of, like you said, storylines coming into it. So I really enjoyed that. We really saw a lot of surprising contenders here. One thing that I noticed is, and this has honestly kind of been the trend of the last couple years, but Hendrick has kind of dialed back their qualifying pace and focused more on their racing pace. Now their cars are still good, but only one car made it to the final round, and that was Kyle Larson. Well, it kind of surprised though, because Kyle Larson is not really known as a good super speedway driver.
Hmm.
He is known as a good qualifier,
Yeah.
but he kind of surprised her. Obviously, it's paid off. Back to back 500 wins. We'll get to that though.
Yeah.
But overall, yeah, it was really cool. The Toyotas really showed out. I think they finally found their mojo at super speedways and qualifying, which could be bad news for the future.
And quickly, those of you hanging with us in the chat, let us know what stood out to you when you watched Wednesday qualifying. Anything that made you happy with the open cars that made it in, the ones that didn't, and teams that surprised you and teams that underwhelmed you. Let us know. Derek, I'll flip it to you. We're quickly going through these Speed Week days and recap before we get to Sunday. But any thoughts and stuff that stood out to you on Wednesday qualifying?
Yeah, I thought Penske was the better cars out there. They qualified second, fourth, and then the outlier Blaney being 20th, I believe. Um, they were the most dominant cars, and I agree with Cody when he said that Hendrick had a little bit of a dip in qualifying speed. I know Kyle Larson barely made the last round, and that was the only driver that made the final round of qualifying. But I mean, even just in terms of going up to Wednesday, just the whole hype of the NASCAR season being back in full swing
Yeah.
and all the interviews that happen, it just gives a nice vibe, and I really really like that about the stuff leading up to Wednesday.
It's funny because no qualifying session has more anticipation than that of the Daytona 500, and yet it's probably the qualifying session that matters the least when you look at the race. I mean, a super speedway, in theory, qualifying does not matter. Although I think there's absolutely value in the fact that every team wants to win the Daytona 500 pole, and they will work hardest for that than they will for any other pole during the regular season. And even if it's Daytona and it's easy, in theory, to drive through the field, at least comparative to non-drafting tracks, I think qualifying is a very big deal at Daytona. Lastly, Marcus, we'll hear your thoughts on what you thought from watching qualifying before we'll move on to Thursday's activities.
I was very happy to see the 56 make the field because, I mean, as you know, if a
Mhm.
lot of people know, that's my number I like to race with a lot. So to watch Truex drive that, I think he was the fastest actually of the open qualifiers. So I mean, just to see the 56 finally race again, that was awesome to me.
Yeah.
Just curious, Marcus, is 56 based off your love for 56 based off of Truex from back in the early 2010s?
So my reasoning for using the 56 was on NASCAR 15 when you had to make your number selection. That was,
Okay.
in my opinion, the coolest number that was open because I mean, there's a lot. I felt like there was a lot of opportunities for paint schemes you could do with that, and then it transferred into Roblox, and then it transferred into iRacing.
I
So,
see.
I
Okay.
think, I mean, I've just used the 56 mainly because Truex didn't drive the 56 anymore.
I see. So just an open car on NASCAR 15. Yeah, that's cool.
Yep.
Well, really quick before we shift to Thursday, I would like to say I fully agree with what King said. He gave his thoughts on qualifying, and I mean, who doesn't really agree with this assessment? King saying that he was surprised by how well the Toyotas did in qualifying. I mean, it's the first pole for a Toyota in the Daytona 500 on the side of Chase Briscoe. Really did not see that coming. I mean, qualifying the past 2 years has been quite random, to be honest. I mean, remember previously had been Hendrick Power and specifically Alex Bowman, who would almost seemingly get the front row every year. King brings up a good point with that. So Toyota shocking the world there in qualifying one on the pole and just overall having a good session. Well, let's move on to Thursday, and that kind of ties into qualifying because we saw the two fastest open cars lock in on Wednesday, that being the two Cup champions that are no longer full-time, Martin Truex Jr. and Jimmy Johnson. So they got to ran the duels without the fear of missing out. Certainly Jimmy probably appreciated that very much after what happened last year, where he barely snuck in as an open car. And then we had the absolute chaos that surrounded the rest of the open cars, the ones that were trying to get into the field. And it just seemed like every open car did not have just a easygoing night. I mean, why would they? It's you're trying to make the biggest stock car race in the world, and I mean, you look at what Chandler Smith tried to do. He was an open car, tried to drive his way in, and wrecked, and it was ultimately his fault. You hate to place blame on drivers, but he was trying to clear in front of, I think, Justin Haley, and that started what was one of the big wrecks of the night. We'll
I
stay
believe
in
it was
order here,
Allmendinger.
and Cody, I'm curious, as a JRM fan as well, Thursday's duels, anything that stuck out to you, and thoughts on the rest of the open cars that won their way in?
Yeah, honestly, here, Chandler Smith here was showing a lot of speed in that machine. He single-handedly drove himself up there to the front, got up there to third. Really was minding his p's and q's. I think it was just a rookie mistake. Him not being as knowledgeable with these Gen 7 cars, and still being kind of a young driver in the field in general. As a JRM fan, that was kind of good for us because he was kind of kicking our butt out there. And unless something really dramatic happened or Algar was able to get back up there, it didn't look too bright, too bright on the circumstances for him. But uh, through all that though, I mean, it was a really good race. I like Duel 1, I like Duel 2, and but that incident right there, that was a very hard hit, and one of many hard hits we had throughout the weekend.
hmm Uh, Certainly. I mean, Chandler Smith shaking up from that, and then here comes Castro Neves involved in what would be the first of many wrecks that he had nothing to do with, and he just happened to got involved in that Chandler Smith incident. Then by the time he gets to turn three, I think they officially said his toe link was broken and he didn't intend to drive across the apron, but it spun him out back into the wall and took a hard hit there. They had to fall back on that provisional and repair the car. Didn't even fall back to backup because Trackhouse had so many issues already where they had to really kind of, I think, allocate the rest of those backups to the full-time drivers that they had available come Sunday. So that was certainly interesting right there. I'll flip it to you, Derek. I know you watched those duels and were interested in the open car situation as well as Trackhouse as a Ross Chastain fan. So I'm curious what you thought about watching the duels.
Yeah, I watched a little of Duel 1. I had some things going on, but I did watch the full length of Duel 2. And just looking here at Duel 1, I thought, I heard from my friends saying that, oh, Justin Allgaier made the field and he's looking fast. I'm like, wow, that's really good for Junior and his entire team. So, yeah, that's cool. And then uh, in terms of Duel 2, I was very surprised by the way it ended. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I thought Anthony Alfredo made a nice move through the grass, but to maybe get that transfer spot over BJ McLeod, but uh, well, neither of them got in. But yeah, I just wonder why they threw the caution with half a second to go before checkered
Oh,
flag.
yep.
and I know a friend of mine definitely hates that. An Eric Jones fan of mine, he definitely got screwed for sure.
I'm curious what the chat thinks about that because we're not going to spend too much time on it just because we have a lot of Daytona 500 discussion to get to, but definitely the hot topic from Thursday that finished particularly to duel number 2. I'm glad you brought it up, Derek. And chat, I mean, those of us hanging out, please discuss with us because I love seeing the different perspectives. What do you do right there? And particularly, I want to know if anyone has an idea on how NASCAR should address this going forward. We saw how they approached the finish to the 500. We'll get into that a bit later, but spew some ideas in the chat. What do you think NASCAR should do to avoid having a controversial finish like that in the future with a wreck? Marcus, you're the last person I want to hear input from here. Uh, Boy, that sounded mean. I didn't mean that in a mean way.
Yeah, no, you're all good.
Uh,
I mean, I think my big thing I took away is usually, you got like a couple open cars that just show up and putter around. I think this year you could have made an argument for every single one of those open cars on why they deserve a spot in the 500. They all came up, all showed out. And especially guys you didn't think you would see, like JJ Yaley was genuinely racing. I forget who it was. I believe it was Allgaier that he was trying to outrace in Duel 1. Yeah. So he was trying to outrace Allgaier, almost did, but unfortunately just got in a bad lane, kind of held himself up. And then, you had BJ McLeod, Alfredo, and you had LaJoy in Duel 2. Both of those guys, all three of those guys showed speed, especially McLeod now that all of his focus goes to super speedways. He doesn't have to worry about bringing a car to the track the next week.
And I feel like that LaJoy was the best open car in the Sunday race, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I said it, I think in one of maybe the first episode, we were talking about Corey LaJoy for some reason, and I've been a Corey LaJoy enjoyer. I know he hasn't rubbed off on people well after stuff happening in the previous season, but I think he's a good super speeder racer. I think the Daytona 500 was evident of that. Don't want to get too deep into it right now. And with that, let's stay on track here. Let's move on to Friday, the official start of races that paid season points. You get points in the duels technically, but this is the start of regular season racing for all of the NASCAR series. And it started on Friday with the Truck Series, the Super Trucks, as some nostalgic fans might call them. And we were treated to what I would certainly consider as one of the greater truck races in recent memory. I mean, think of these truck races at Daytona to start the season recently. They've been kind of messy as of late. This year was refreshingly different. While you did have the incidents and a last lap wreck, not allowing the field to finish it under green, we saw some racing that kind of cooked 3 lanes all strong, and you could tell that the trucks were never really running stable. It was always a lot of moving around, which seems to be pretty standard for the truck series at this point. But let me go in reverse order here. And Marcus, the truck race certainly, I think was a memorable one. I certainly enjoyed watching it. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I do have two takeaways. I mean, first off, the truck race, I thought it was anybody's race. For a second on the last lap there, I thought Johnny Sauter was going to come back and win the whole thing. Of all people, Johnny Sauter coming back. Unfortunately, that just didn't go right. It was cool to see Parker Kligerman have the win for a couple hours.
Yeah.
He absolutely, I think he deserved it. I hope Henderson does win that appeal for him, but because I think they do have, they think they have a pretty good argument. Kligerman didn't really specify. My second point with the truck race I have was actually the broadcast, and
Mm,
it's not positive. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, no, I Harvick and Logano, they do a good job, right? But they're not the lead commentators, and when your lead commentator, she doesn't really know how to lead it, well, being Jamie Little. I just think that's a big problem. I mean, I personally I personally muted the Fox stream and turned on MRN and listened to their commentary
yeah,
because I was not enjoying listening to Jamie Little's commentary.
and me and Cody did the same exact thing. It's actually the first time I've ever attempted to sync up MRN with the TV. I'm either
Oh, I'm
watching the TV or I'm listening to MRN because I'm in the car. And very appreciative that we did that, Cody. More so just a credit to the quality that MRN is, or PRN, whoever's calling the races for whatever particular weekend. That was fun to listen to. Very professional that broadcast always is. I'll flip it to you, Derek. The truck race was certainly something at a lot of moments, a lot of good racing, and of course had the crashes. Your takeaways from Friday?
Yeah, well, quickly on the topic of the Fox broadcasting crew. I mean,
Yeah.
they've been a laughing stock for a couple of years now, and they just don't seem to be getting better at all, even with Michael Waltrip getting out of that booth. But yeah, but with the actual racing though, I thought Corey Heim had a really good day. He had a good amount of stage points, and it does suck for Parker Kligerman to get ousted of the win. I think it was too low of an anti-rear roll bar. I think
Yeah.
that was the culprit. But it
Breaking
wasn't.
NASCAR fans' hearts on Valentine's Day.
Oh yeah, I mean everyone loves Kligerman. I mean not many haters I know of, but not just him, but people like Justin Haley who finished fifth. Also got ousted from his position. Got 0 points. Same with Sawalich and Maggio, and I think although McDowell was near the back, he also got a post race penalty.
And Cody, we of course watched the race together, and we enjoyed what we were seeing. Particularly, I mean, it really stood out to us how they were getting that third lane formed, and they were making three lanes work. I think you also pointed out, Cody, that usually that third lane would work best when they get some drivers with experience out there. Do you want to bring that up?
Yeah, I think I'll point out this just real quick here. I think that was the key in each series all
Mm,
weekend. For our third lane working, I think we saw in the Cup race. I think we also saw in the Xfinity race. But yeah, it was really. I mean, I saw Matt Crafton do it a handful of times. You saw drivers like maybe Infinger, Sauter, guys who have been in the series, even Rhodes at times, guys that have been established in the series, champions, know what they're doing. Go up to the outside and build it up, especially on restarts. Um, as per though, being trucks though, still pretty wanky. I mean,
mm.
it drivers were all over the place. You know, some of those pushes didn't end up going well. A lot of uh, lifting the rear ends off the trucks at times. I know you're not supposed
Mhm.
to lock bumpers, but
Yeah.
just not full on square bumps. And that's where we got some of our incidents from.
As what I like to say is avoidable crashes usually,
Yeah,
like very avoidable in the instance of the truck series.
I do have a
yeah.
point. I do have a point I want to bring up relating to stability as well, like Cody was just talking about. On Twitter, I believe it was Raja Karuth that posted on Twitter about how the trucks were actually kind of hard to drive around the track. You know, you couldn't hold it wide open in the pack on the bottom anymore.
I'd believe it.
Uh, I think we give it a couple more years, and I think we'll be back to what Daytona used to be back in the early 2000s or early 2010s. You know.
I'm glad you brought it up. Daytona's getting bumpy again, and we'll have to see if it gets to the level that we saw at the end of the COT era right there before they repaved it in time for the 2011 500. But handling certainly played a factor this week, and we might have to get into that more in depth later. Before we switch to Saturday, we've had some new chats here. King giving some really good assessments. RRN Rux Racing Network as well in the chat. Ace, who, when we were talking about qualifying, brought up the GOAT himself, Jimmy Johnson, who finished third in the 500. We'll talk about that in our 500 discussion, but not only that, he qualified in that Legacy Motor Club Toyota equipment, and I think it certainly speaks to the improvements they've made there at that camp. And King, with his assessment of the truck race, agrees with us. He thinks it was pretty entertaining and he was glad to see different people run up front, new faces with a mix of veterans. I think that's really a good place that the Truck Series is in right now. That it's not just all, teenagers. And he particularly brought up Thorsport doing a good job in the first two stages, but then it all kind of unraveled. Stage three, King gave one more assessment as well on the Parker Kligerman story. Uh, I mean, I think we'd all agree, as King says, Parker Kligerman deserved it the most, and it's like, we don't know what particularly goes on in inspection and what's like really bad to get caught for, but I mean, what's Parker Kligerman gonna do with that ride height slightly off? I mean, certainly if he passed pre-race inspection, I don't know what's happening for him to fail post-race.
Definitely just mistakes with how the race goes on and
Yeah.
just gets a little bit too high or low, and it
Uh,
can just happen.
And I'd hate to bring up a controversial point here while we can't get into it too in depth to stay on schedule here, but should Parker Klickerman should winners be purposely tapping the wall to say, "Oh, I accidentally bent the truck a little bit," so you can't fault that for me in post race inspection. I think William Byron he tapped the wall. That's not disputable in his celebration, but he almost
Mhm.
did so in a way that has some fans conspirizing. Is that a word? I don't know, but about William Byron maybe doing that intentionally.
Well,
Mm.
yeah. I mean, I could say Chad Knaus usually tells you to hit the rear end, not the front end. So
I was just about to say, you brought up the go Jimmy Johnson. I just open a can of worms on yourself there, Zach, because that is exact. It's got video proof of Chad telling Johnson that many years ago. I do believe it was at Texas.
I mean, that's as conspiracy theory as it gets, in my opinion. Well, we might as well stay on schedule here. Let's flip to Saturday, where we had two races, and we could not have kicked off the day any worse. I mean,
oh
um,
gosh.
we have to talk about the ARCA race because I put it into the run sheet,
I'm glad
and
I didn't watch it, first of all.
I didn't watch it live. I was working, but I did watch. Watched the full replay because I stayed up late Saturday night, and they put it back on FS1 on the TV schedule, and so I did get a good
Oh
understanding of the race, and didn't like the amount of time under caution like completely
yeah, no.
obliterate the time green flag racing. And if it wasn't criticizing the ARCA race, it's criticizing the broadcast of the ARCA race, similar to the criticisms of the truck race broadcast. And it's just not a good way to kick off Saturday. Seem
Mm-mm.
getting a headache thinking about it. I don't want to spend too much time on this.
I,
I've given my 2 cents. Let me flip it to you, Marcus.
yeah, no, I got two takes on it. Mainly, number one is about one of the drivers, Cletus McFarland. I
Yeah.
believe at one point, the live broadcast for Cletus McFarland had 40,000
Yeah,
viewers. 40,000 people
Really?
tuned
it
in to
did.
watch him. And if you go on YouTube now and watch the replay of the in-car, I believe it's at last time I looked, it was at like 600,000 views, which
Wow.
I think that's absolutely insane. Cletus obviously has a big following.
Hmm.
And especially, after that first crash, I went back and looked. During the red flag, he was actually, talking to the people who are watching the stream, like talking about, his first couple laps experience. My second point I want to bring up now is to give you an idea of how long the race was. So we're gonna bring esports into this. iRacing every year does a NIS event, and it's the Daytona 500 200 lap event. By the time ARCA finished 80 laps, I was already 150 laps into my NIS 500 race that started at the same time as ARCA. That
Wow.
might not be a good thing for ARCA.
Mm.
Yeah, that really puts it in perspective. Dang.
Yeah.
Well,
At one point in the race, I did see that they had 8 minutes of green flag running,
yeah.
and this was past halfway.
Mhm.
I do believe. I could be wrong about that, but
That's a little less than 10 laps of racing, I
Imagine
believe.
it,
being
yeah.
Castro Neves, who was in the ARCA race, and he got beat up in that ARCA race, and thinking, "Oh my goodness, is this really what stock car racing is all about?" Because
Oh my.
that was his first stock car race, if you don't count the duels. And
Hmm.
I'm curious, before I flip it to you, Derek, for some thoughts on the ARCA race. Do we have anyone in the chat that had known about or watched Cleus McFarland on YouTube before they heard he was in the ARCA race? I know I put my hand up to that. I followed him when he bought the Freedom Factory, and that's where I really enjoyed his content creation. I followed all of his videos on restoring that Freedom Factory. Of course, that's what it was called. That's what it's called now, and that's what he named it when he bought it. I think that was really good. That's how I knew Cletus McFarland. So I've known him for years. But I'll flip it to you, Derek. Even if you didn't watch the ARC race, you probably heard about the chaos that ensued, and I'm curious what you were thinking of it.
Well, I mean, any ARCA Daytona race I've ever watched, it usually comes down to the last lap where there's a caution, and then or they go green with one to go or something like that, and
Yeah.
there's like not enough run to actually create a good finish.
Hmm.
So, and I think someone in this panel brought up the point of how there was a full commercial at 8 to go. Is
Yeah.
that
What
right?
what the hell?
Yeah.
What?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my, no
And Jamie
way.
Little's like brought it, sent it to commercial like it's normal. Like you know, I mean, I don't know how else she'd send it to commercial, but making us, it's like gaslighting us into thinking, nope, it's normal to have commercial on Nintendo Go.
I think them getting that commercial money was way more important than actually looking at the finish for the viewers. I think so.
I promise I will make sure to say some positives on the side of commercials when we get to our Daytona 500 discussion. And Cody, last to speak here on the ARC race, I do want to bring up this thought before I hand it off to you. Listening to Dave Moody on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio today, one of my favorite shows to listen to there. Someone called in about the ARCA race, and I thought Dave Moody brought up a really good point. You could say that ARCA racing quality is just not good enough to put them on the super speedways, but you have drivers that, like, how else are they going to get their experience racing at Daytona or Talladega? There's a thought that maybe ARCA should just not race on super speedways, and then when Dave Moody brings that up, it's like I fully agree with that. I feel like ARCA, while it might not be the prettiest, and certainly on the super speedways, it just has to be that kind of not good looking, makeup on a pig type deal of super speedway racing because you have drivers that have to get experience. You don't have a local super speedway like you have local short tracks. And so that's my 2 cents I want to add. I want to hear your thoughts, Cody.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dave and what Dave said about that because and it actually brings up another point too. I do not I can't remember what driver. I want to say Chandler Smith, but I don't think it was Chandler Smith. But one of the drivers in the lower series, and I'm not including ARCA in this, so but the trucks and Xfinity are not allowed to lock bumpers. Cup Series, it's a okay. He complained that NASCAR needs to take away that rule because how else are drivers going to learn how to bump and actually lock a bumper with a driver if they can't even do that in the lower series and it's allowed in the Cup Series?
Mhm.
I thought that brought up a good point, but yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, there's guys. I mean, years and years ago, the ARCA series was a lot different. I mean, you look at the early 2010s, you had some massive names. Honestly, I feel like one of the peak points of ARCA racing was the mid 2000s
Yeah.
till the late 2000 or the mid 2010s. You had so many big names in there that raced on a weekly basis and tore up the scene, and they wouldn't know the skill that they know now if it wasn't for that series. So although nowadays it can kind of turn into a crapshoot, I still feel like the ARCA series of super speedways is very pivotal for the drivers that want to make a bigger career and want to do something good with it.
Fully agree. We've got double digit amount of viewers right now. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. We've got 10 watching according to what I'm seeing. King has been very active in the chat. We encourage all of you to be active as well because I'm making sure I acknowledge every one of these points that King is bringing up right now in our conversations, and we'll do the same for anyone else involved in our chat here. Of course, stick around for our chat open room discussion at the end of the show as well. Let's move on to the other half of the racing on Saturday before we get to our Sunday discussion. Let's spend a couple minutes here talking about Xfinity. I want to start this discussion by giving kudos to the CW broadcast. And oddly
Mhm.
enough, on the same show, Dave Moody show on Sirius XM, I heard a caller call in and say they absolutely hated the CW broadcast, citing that they didn't like the audio. Dave Moody himself said, "Well, I saw the complete opposite on social media. I can't believe you would think that." And certainly surprised me as well. I love the CW broadcast. I love the graphics. People were skeptical about
Oh
the
yeah.
leaderboard at the bottom of the screen. I thought that looked good, and I especially loved that when they did the starting lineup, you had a picture of every car that the driver was running.
Yes.
Not only that, you didn't have cartoon driver photos like Fox had. You had really good and high quality photos of the drivers. That's so good. I'm excited for the CW broadcasting Xfinity this season. I think the booth has a lot of potential as well. Let me go back in reverse order here, and I'll start with you, Cody. You were watching that Xfinity race and you had thoughts about the broadcast quality as well. Curious what you're thinking of it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I was busy doing with a family event, but I was able to watch it on my phone. Didn't really hear much of the broadcast, but from what I did hear, I did enjoy it. I've always enjoyed Jamie McMurray, and I feel like this was Parker Cleveland's first big time up in the booth. I think he's had a few truck races in the past,
He's usually a
maybe some
reporter
ARCA.
for
Yeah,
NBC.
he's usually down in the pit. So this is a big step for him. I think he did all pretty good, and obviously Adam Alexander, he's a great commentator. I know people give him some flack sometimes, but I really do enjoy Adam Alexander. He's been there for a while. He's put in the time and work from his early days of working as a pit road reporter for MRN in the early 2000s. So I feel like the chemistry up there was really good, and I'm really excited to see what the rest of the season has. Those guys will be up there all year, so they've got a lot of time to uh, was it practice their craft.
Hmm. Well, those of you watching, if you want to get into the chat, I encourage you to send in your thoughts. What do you think of the CW broadcast? It's certainly a hot topic from the week, and I'll flip it up to you, Derek. You saw the broadcast and you saw the race. I don't want to make this exclusively a conversation about the broadcast, but the race certainly had it all, like most of these Xfinity races do on the super speedways. And some people say Xfinity Racing is collectively the best series in NASCAR, even on these super speedways as well. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought the super speedway was quite evident of what happened in previous years. I mean, we got to talk about Austin Hill, right? He won the
Mm,
past couple Daytonas, and he unfortunately though didn't actually finish the race. He had a, if you guys didn't watch, it was a mechanical failure, I believe, engine that cost him the race, and it was actually his teammate who picked up the win and led the field because for some reason those RCR cars are really strong up front, and yeah, that whole finish was also great, and yeah.
absolutely. Marcus, finally to you. And the Xfinity race was very interesting. Had those
Mhm.
Xfinity wrecks and had quite the Xfinity finish, generalizing it, but I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, like Derek was saying, Austin Hill with it was I believe it was something with the rear axle actually. There's like
Oh,
there's a leak out, there's a leak and there's an oil leak from there. So, anyways, no, I don't think the race was bad at all. That was probably, I think that was the second best race of the week, of course, to the
I
Cup
enjoyed
Series.
it.
Yeah, and that I think the broadcast made it really good. Personally, I love like you said, you mentioned the cars and the graphics. I love that.
Yeah,
Shows the fans actually, like I feel like showing them faces does not really help them with like, trying to figure out which car is which, and then you show them the cars like, okay, that car is right here. Awesome. It reminds me a lot of how Fox was in the early 2000s during their starting lineups.
yeah.
Which I think, that's what a lot of broadcasts should strive to be like.
I think it's beautiful, and hopefully the CW
Mhm.
is a bright spot in this Fox portion of the broadcast schedule, because I guess CW has the entire Xfinity schedule. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. Well, we'll be looking forward to it, and that leaves us into our Daytona 500 discussion, and the one we've all been waiting for. We're dedicating at least about 20 minutes to this. It might conflict with our one quick break of the show, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And I guess as far as where to start with the Daytona 500, I'd like to hear what the chat thinks about it just overall. Looking at King here, he gave his thoughts on our previous segment. He certainly enjoyed the CW broadcast a lot more than the Fox broadcast as well. Love the graphics too. But focusing on the Daytona 500, how about we start with the weather? I guess that was probably the first thing to encounter in that race. We knew that the weather was going to hit. It seemed like that was in the forecast all week long, and but it wasn't a complete washout. They got the race in on time, but it hit, I guess, sooner than expected. And I don't know how long the red flag was, but it was 2, 3 hours, something like that. They dealt with it, got the track dry, and most importantly, it looked like most of the fans stuck around. I'll start with you, Marcus. How do you deal with that? As a fan that goes to NASCAR races, I think one of the most agonizing experiences is when you're there and it's raining and you have to deal with the weather delay. It absolutely sucks having to sit at that track.
I could tell you something that sucked even more from what I was hearing about is, with the arrival yesterday of President Trump at the track, there was a lot more security than usual
Yeah,
trying to
I'm
get
glad you
in.
brought that up too.
Yeah, and my little brother was actually up in the grandstands. I have my weatherman, who is my dad, on the backstretch. But my little brother decided he was gonna get into the grandstands like I think 30 minutes before the race started. Didn't
Yeah,
even make it in there,
no
and then the
chance.
rain hit, and he was kind of stuck in the rain until like I don't know how long into it. But a lot of fans were definitely stuck out there, which was not great for them.
The only positive is that the rain stopped the race, allowed them time to get in, but you probably
Hmm.
saw the pictures on social media of that gigantic line getting in. We had a frequent viewer, Tyler Sage, post a photo of it as well, who attended the race, and it was certainly did not look ideal, but Daytona did give warnings. The track did give warnings. You better get there early, they said, and some fans accommodated, some fans didn't. I'll flip it to you, Derek. Thoughts on the weather situation?
I mean, typical Daytona weather, right? I mean, last time Trump was there, there was also a hefty rain
Yeah.
delay. But the last time he did, it did actually go to Monday, I'm pretty sure. So,
Yeah.
but thankfully we had racing for that Sunday night, and it was only a 3-hour wait, I believe. But felt bad for the fans, but I of course liked the Daytona night setting.
Yep. Looked like most of them stayed around. Still had that nice Daytona crowd for the duration of the race. Cody, you're the last one to give some thoughts on the weather situation. How do you think about how NASCAR handled it?
I think they did all right. I mean, they're honestly they could have looked at the weather, and the weather actually looked a lot worse than what it ended up doing. They could have just said, you know what, we're just gonna call it. We're gonna say, hey, people come back tomorrow, which they've done that before in the past year, and sometimes that's come to bite them in the butt. But I do like that they waited it out. They wanted to see how it actually was gonna pan out, and it really did work out. I was really happy about that. Really glad that they did all that. I think it really helped for the fans as well. You know, there was still a fantastic crowd after the rain passed, and the race didn't go really late in the night like other rain delays have in the past. You're like sometimes we're used to seeing 1 of 12 or 1 o'clock finishes. It ended, I think, around 10 o'clock.
I think it
Um,
ended before that.
and maybe yeah, maybe even before that. So overall, I think it was really well done and really well managed by NASCAR and the officials.
I think they did the best with the hand of cards that they were dealt. And King mentions that he thinks the racing was unexpectedly amazing right after the rain came. And to his point, I mean, it seemed like they're just kind of racing along there. I think they were only exclusively 2 wide before the rain happened. So, I mean, it was barely 10 laps of that. So not much to happen anyway before the rain hit. I'm glad that they didn't have like a 2022 situation in the summer race where rain hit too aggressively and it caused a huge wreck. So luckily we avoided that. Moving off of the topic of the rain, um, kind of a dull way to start the Daytona 500 discussion. Not talking about the racing, excuse me, but getting to the racing. And on a surface level here, I mean, it was quite the race. King gave his 2 cents on it. It was a good race, lots of 3 wide. And that's going to be a discussion we're going to get to here in a moment. But overall, what do you think of the race as it led up to that first considerable incident, which was a stack up on the restart? Let's focus on that here for this next sub bullet point to discuss. Marcus, you saw that stack up and took out some heavy hitters, particularly like Ross Chastain took out Elio, and not something you like to see when something happens, especially at the front and drivers in the back have to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, you saw there were some guys that escaped lucky. I mean, off the top of my head, Kyle Busch was in there. I think Jimmy Johnson got in there during that wreck, and then a lot of Trackhouse guys. I believe Suarez was the only Trackhouse car at the end. I don't know,
Trackhouse got beat up this Speedweeks.
dude.
Did
They
you
did.
see how much? Like they're going to spend a lot of money after this week.
Did
Seven
you?
seven total cars they used over the weekend.
Yeah, not what they
Man,
wanted. And
Yeah,
Pitbull exited from the ownership stake as
that's what
well.
that means. That'll definitely mean something for. I think a lot of speculation came from the Pitbull thing. Sorry to kind of go off track here. A
Yeah,
lot of
no,
speculation came out of that could mean this is Suarez's last year with the team, and that Pitbull wanted to stay there if Suarez was there, and since now Trackhouse is losing him, now they're getting rid of him because they're probably going to get Connor Zilic or someone in that car. Pitbull was like, yeah, no, this isn't really my cup of tea anymore. Like, dipping.
And you know what's funny too is Pitbull still did that pre-race concert for the Daytona 500 like mere hours after announcing that. I'll
Yeah.
switch to you, Derek. Probably your least favorite topic to talk about as a Ross Chastain fan, but looking
Yeah.
at that incident that took out the one and took him out hard, it was a stack up caused by Joey Logano, who I think ultimately had a not a throttle bottle, a throttle body issue. And I mean, what do you do in that situation?
All you can do is just blame Logano and hate him and
Yeah.
hate his guts. But
Yep.
no, but he definitely was probably the biggest op that entire race. He had so much black magic that went on.
Yeah, that's what we joked about. You know, this guy. Which drivers? Let me offer this to the chat. Which drivers? You know, Mahomes is big in sports with that meme surrounding him that he used the black magic. It did run out on the Super Bowl, but in NASCAR, which driver sticks out to you as a driver that has black magic on their side? We thought it was
Willie
Joey
B.
Logano, especially
William
after how
Byron.
last season ended. Marcus thinks William Byron. And Joey Logano, I mean, put the black magic on display in the race. He was about to go down, I think, a second lap, and a phantom debris caution came out. That
Yeah.
seems like black magic to me,
Hmm.
jokingly. And Joey Logano, though, did look good before he was out of the race. Cody, you're the
It,
last one. Actually, I'll let you finish up, Derek.
yeah, and on top of that, I mean, it just reminded me of Mahomes how he would get a phantom flag in like a an NFL game, and
Mm-hmm.
then at the caution, I bet he was doing this to the sideline trying to get another play. But with the that whole wreck though, you got fuel for Trackhouse Racing. 3 out of 4 cars in that were affected. 2, I believe, had race-ending uh, wrecks. I think Van Gisbergen kept going, but he didn't really do much after that. And then of course one of my least favorite drivers is Suarez. He finished the race, but thank God that Marcus said that he was gonna be gone after this season. But yeah, I'm not
I'm a
really
Stars
much of a
fan.
Suarez enjoyer.
Oh,
What's that?
I was just saying. I thought I didn't. I've never really met anybody that didn't like Suarez that much.
No, yeah, I'm not a big fan. No.
Oh, Cody, you saw the stack up, and it kind of caught us off guard. Expect, I mean, you don't see restart wrecks like that often at Daytona, especially in the 500, because these next gens aren't known to stall like that. It wasn't technically a stall, but caused an issue that drivers much would have preferred didn't happen. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the issue for Logano was he had a plastic bag here that went up through the grill, and then yeah, got stuck at the throttle body.
I,
So
I think Larry Mack said it was like a Walmart bag
yeah, it was yeah.
specifically, if they could ever identify it.
Yeah, and so it was really a freak accident how all that happened. His car was stuck at I think 6,000 RPMs. It couldn't go any higher, and you're not really gonna get that under caution. So it was kind of just one of those things. You hate it for the rest of the field because there were, like you said, there's a lot of drivers there in the back here that were taken out and got
Mhm.
some good damage because of that. Um, really kind of hurt the day here for a lot of drivers. So I don't know. I feel like it wasn't um all Logano's fault as it was mainly just kind of a freak accident. But nevertheless, it really killed the races for a lot of drivers.
Before we move on to some of the other notable incidents, looking back at the chat here, RRN thinks that Kyle Larson shows some black magic, and then King once again, uh, going back to the point that Marcus made, he basically agrees fully that the Pitbull situation could align with some not so bright future surrounding Daniel Soares. I guess we'll have to see. Let's focus on though the maybe the most prominent incident of the race, that kind of ignited some, I don't know, like not officially beef, but on the track certainly it showed, and it was Logano versus Stenhouse because they ultimately caused an incident right there, due to collective aggressive driving. That's how I'm gonna say it. You had Logano behind Stenhouse, got to run, tried to go low. Stenhouse blocked it, kind of Logano-esque, with a Logano block that some people like to make fun of, and then it should have ended there, but it didn't. That's where it really kind of went beyond the line. You had Logano try to continue to fill the hole, and Stenhouse continuing to try and completely cut him off. It got to the point where Stenhouse just kept driving left when he couldn't. I mean, they were already making contact, and it not only started a wreck, it obviously wrecked them, but it took out two heavy hitters. Kyle Busch, Ryan Blaney, instant bystanders. I'll start with the Kyle Busch fan on thoughts of that incident, Marcus.
Everything's great. He's looking forward to getting back in his race car and winning Atlanta.
Uh,
I
Forget about
mean, I think Ryan Blaney was one of my picks last week. So that didn't really go well. I mean, that obviously didn't go well for him. I just think it's funny how the two most controversial super speedway drivers, just kind of got into it there, and all that happened because of them. I'm, Stenhouse got lucky to get out of that, but Logano, I mean, he started celebrating that he could finally just get out of the car, started doing burnouts for the fans out of turn four.
that. Yeah.
So I guess burnouts mean you win the race now. But I don't know. I understand the aggression. I could kind of see both sides. Like Logano kept going down because at that point, what are you supposed to do? You can't just let off because Logano has Gregson pushing him as hard as he can, trying to get to the front. But like Stenhouse thought that he had the line that he should have had Logano right there, and just kept going. I think it's more so racing deal, but both of them could have
Nah,
figured it out a
very,
lot
very,
easier.
very avoidable. I think Logano said in his interview as well that he tried backing out once it got too far beyond that line, and he couldn't because he was getting pushed. Derek, you saw the wreck. You initially, I think, placed most of the blame on Logano. Is that right?
I'm not sure about that. And he said that he backed out trying to get out of that. He looked like he just kept going no matter what. I mean, it was both. It was basically both of their fault. But if I had to put more of a blame, I'd put Stenhouse. Stenhouse took way too long to choose a lane. He was just staying right in that middle lane between
Yeah.
the middle and the top, and he just stayed right in that lane right there. And I think Logano had a point. He could have just kept going, or he would have stacked everyone up behind him. So I think Stenhouse might be more in the wrong for this one.
Yeah. And Cody, you saw the wreck as well. Who you placing blame on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When I first looked at it, I definitely thought Stenhouse. I've looked back at it a handful of times. I've listened to the other people talk about it and everything. It is a racing deal. However, the aggressiveness of Stenhouse and the aggressiveness of Logano, um, it's going to be more than just a racing deal when it involves those two because you have Logano's known for aggressive racing, especially at super speedways, the blocks and everything. Stenhouse, same thing. So I, I don't know. You can't. I'm gonna blame both of them really. If anything, Logano tried to fill the hole. Stenhouse blocked it too many times, even though he should have just kind of gave up and then just worked his way. Um, because I don't think yeah, I feel like he acted like his race was over if he didn't block Logano there. I mean, I know Logano's good at the super speedways, but yeah, I think it was bad on both ends. Both drivers needed to figure it out better. And after everything was said and done, you had a bunch of wrecked race cars and a bunch of unhappy fans at two mainly two drivers.
Race cars that did need to be wrecked. We're gonna head to break here in a moment. We'll continue this Daytona 500 discussion on the other side of it. Before we do, want to keep this discussion ongoing with King. I don't think we've ever had in our 3 episodes. We've had a lot of people chatting. We've never had a consistently active chatter like King. We might have to give him an award for that. But before we head to break, adding his 2 cents on the Logano incident, uh, I mean, he brings up a good point. Those might be the two most dangerous drivers. And when you put them in a combination next to each other on a super speedway, those are two drivers known for some super speedway questionable moves. I'd hate to be the drivers around them. And as case in point, drivers around them were innocent bystanders to that incident. We'll head to break here. We'll be back in less than 2 minutes. I dare you to time me. We will be back. We are back. Like I said, under 2 minutes, and we're back from break. Let's continue on this Daytona 500 discussion. We don't want to wait any longer. And moving off the topic of Logano versus Stenhouse, one of the innocent bystanders was Kyle Busch, and kind of interesting what happened to him. He spun to the inside, ultimately hit the wall, but didn't hit it hard. The biggest issue is that he blew out his tires. I'm actually going to give the floor to Marcus here because, as a
Mhm.
Kyle Busch fan, he's well educated on issues that came from Kyle Busch getting spun right there, and I'd like you to explain that, Marcus.
Yeah, so the new rule this year was this, I think, stems from both the incident at Kansas last year where Josh Berry spun, blew all four tires, and NASCAR deemed him out of the race because there was contact with the car, as well as Ryan Priest, or not Ryan Priest, Ryan Blaney at the Glen, and just the whole big one at Talladega that happened. They were picky and choosy on which cars get towed back to pit road and which ones don't. So this year NASCAR made it to where you get if you blow two or more tires and you need to get towed, they now tow you to the garage instead of pit road to get your tires put on.
Hmm.
Well, Kyle Busch got tires, went back out on track to try and meet the minimum speed, whatever. And because I didn't even know there was a minimum speed still, I thought it was just get the car fixed, go out, and you have 3 attempts, right? Kyle goes out and didn't even get a chance because you know, they found out something broke on the car. You could hear it on the radio when he was or on the onboard when he went to turn one. He goes back to the garage so they could continue fixing it, and then one of the officials told Randall Burnett that they're done. They came back to the garage, did not meet minimum speed.
Wow, and that's certainly something that I think needs to be visited going forward. That's another work
Mhm.
in progress that's all of a sudden kind of come to fruition with this next gen car. Kind of a bad deal, I will say. Glad you gave some context on that, though, Marcus. And with that, let's move on to maybe the most prominent incident from Daytona, the one that sits on the thumbnail for today's episode, and it's the one that sent Ryan Preece into the air in a way that I don't think a stock car at a professional level has ever been sent into the air before. It's Christopher Bell, I think, that gets spun initially, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Well,
Hits
the
the
front end of
wall
the crusher.
and comes back down. You saw it coming. He was going to hit someone in the field, whoever was the unlucky one to get them. And in comes Ryan Preece. Has history at super speedways, flying through the air, most notably Daytona 2023, where he took the tumble that's responsible for no grass on the back stretch. Not only that, had that absolute hard hit with Kyle Larson 2023 Talladega Spring. And Ryan Preece just has to have another one. You have to feel bad at some point. You heard his interview. He's fed up. We saw that car get up into the air, do a wheelie, and then what's interesting is that it started to looked like it was going to come back down to the ground. Then it does a front motion, a blowover while going forward. Never seen that before. Cody,
Hmm.
have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, I'll talk more about it though here in my segment here in a little bit, but um, the biggest thing is I think the car we've seen this happen before. Um, I- we've seen cars come back, bounce off the wall, come back into the field, and that car that hits them kind of jumps up over them a little bit. It's almost like an Indy car effect, I
Yeah.
would say, or an open wheel car, whether you jump over the rear tire or whatever. Um, Most time, yeah, then they just land back down, and that's been the case for many decades. The only bad thing about this was the bottom of the car and the fact that he hit Eric Jones, which basically just took the left side of the car and lifted it up as well. So I'll talk more about that. I'll go more in detail though about my thoughts on that in a little bit.
Yeah, good plug. In a matter of minutes, we'll head to Turning My Wrenches, featuring Cody Sill. We'll hear more on Ryan Priest. Going to you, Marcus. Cody brings up a good point. You have this bottom of the next gen car, which is completely flat, like never seen before in previous generations. And
Hmm.
I mean, what else is completely flat and built to fly? Is a wing of an airplane. And
Yeah.
sure enough, next gen takes off when you make it like the wing of an airplane.
And that flip, it kind of reminded me of I'm thinking about two incidents, and the first one I think of is I believe it's the Mercedes at Le Mans back in like the 90s. That's more of Derek's wheel right there, as well as
96.
and
I do
then
believe 99,
also
99.
I think it was 99, yeah. And then you also had the Mark Webber flip at the Valencia street race that one year in 2010, I
2010.
believe.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what those two flips reminded me of. Or even like Scott Dixon 2017 Indy where he flew into the fence.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you just don't see cup cars go up in the air like that usually. And coming from someone that was at the 2023 Daytona race where that did happen, that was just something I never thought something crazier could happen to Priest than what happened there. And then he proved us all wrong and decided, like let me overshadow my previous crash with this one. So I think the solution is just put the grass back and that wouldn't have happened as bad.
Well, what stood out to me is that Ryan Preece in that interview I referenced moments ago was that I think he said in that same interview that this wreck hurt harder, yet he wasn't tumbling like he did at Daytona, and this wreck hurt him a lot more, he said.
Yeah.
Certainly stood out to me, and Derek, you have some thoughts on this as well. We were all in awe when we watched it.
Yeah, I mean, when he was at his interview after the race, he was just like in shock, really. And I remember he said something about how when he was in the air, he was thinking of his daughter. So I thought that was a really touching moment right there, just thinking of how scary it is to be in the air for that long. And, when he watches the onboard camera on the inside, he's squinting his eyes. I can't imagine the fear
Yeah,
in his
boy,
eyes.
that was a good look on that onboard camera. You could see him, yeah, clenching his face, and then the onboard goes out once it comes back to the ground. Uh, yeah, I can get it from Ryan Priest's perspective. He does not want to be subjected to these continual just tests of the human body limit. And King in the chat says you might as well be sponsored by Rocket League. I know I saw that meme already
Yeah,
today.
I literally pointed that out whenever I was watching the race. So Rocket League meme was gonna come out pretty
Uh,
soon.
the NASCAR memes, there's like the most popular NASCAR memes page on Instagram posted an exact meme that you're thinking of uh, today. It certainly encapsulates that pretty well. And I don't think you'll ever see something like that again. Even if next gen doesn't get any big changes to address it, that's just such a freak accident. That's one other takeaway I have is that I don't know if you could try that again. Next gen will have flips probably continuing to happen, but not like that. Not a front blowover. Crazy. I
Yep.
mean,
Yeah.
just
And
crazy.
something I want to add on to that is you mentioned, how we talked about it hurt a little more than the previous crash. I think the two big things that made that hurt more is number one, or actually three things. Slamming up the banking is the first part.
Yep.
Rear ending the wall is the second part. We know the next gen and their rear ends have a history of not going well together. And then keep in mind those cars have very little suspension in them. So that landing must have hurt a little bit as well, going back on the ground. Kind of like how a sprint car can be sometimes.
Hmm. Indeed. Well, glad we took time to discuss that, and let's move on to the finish, though. I don't know. How about maybe one of the craziest Daytona 500 finishes we've seen in just sheer like unpredictability? Like we've seen a Daytona 500 photo finish in 2016, but you saw it coming, like that built up out of turn four. And even if you saw this wreck happening, which it really isn't all that surprising to see a wreck on the last lap anymore. Did you see that outcome though? To see a random car from the middle of the pack just have the C's part, and of course that being William Byron to go back to back. That was quite crazy. I don't think the Daytona 500 has ever had that, except maybe the 1979 incident, but that was just with two cars running into each other that allowed the third place driver to win that one. Uh, Quite crazy. And like we said with Priest, I don't know if a finish like that will ever happen again. And I'll flip it to you, Derek, to start. What can you recall your initial reaction to that?
Yeah, well, just in those last 10 to 5 laps, I had a thought in my mind thinking that Corey LaJoy was gonna win this race, and I was like, oh my gosh,
He
no
was running
way.
good.
He was running really good. He was up front consistently, and I mean, there was a couple times where he stuck up the high line, but in terms of the finish, though, I mean, like people were leading, and then all of a sudden, like Byron comes out of it along with Reddick and Jimmy Johnson. He finished P3. I know you're pretty happy about that,
Yeah.
Zach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, uh, I'm elated. I remember my initial reaction is related to eventually coming to the realization that that 84 is in third according to the leaderboard. King in the chat is a Jimmy Johnson fan. As far as I know, I'm curious his thoughts on it as well. If he'd like to send in his in-depth analysis of what he remembers. But Marcus, you watched the finish as well, and I don't know how happy or not happy you were about the outcome, but I'm curious to hear.
I wanted to, I'm gonna be honest. This might not be a very nice take to some people, but I wanted to see Denny get number 4. That would have been historic to see. We haven't seen someone get more than 3, I think, since either Petty or was it Allison that has 4?
Yarbrough has
Yarbrough.
4. He's the only other guy with more than 3.
Yeah, he's the only other
Besides
guy.
Petty.
He's second to Petty. Yeah, that would have been historic to see in this era of super speedway racing. Completely unpredictable, and I think Hamlin would have had it if Custer didn't come back down. But we were talking earlier about how Logano had black magic. This race made me think. I mean, granted, the last couple of years makes me think Byron has black magic. Every time there's an overtime, always count on Byron to be there, right? This time though, I saw this tweet on Twitter, right? And I didn't really think much about it. And then I went back and looked at it. Byron was like that close to getting clipped by Bell and getting
Mm-hmm.
and not winning the 500. And then just have that happen on the last lap, the gates, open just enough for him to go by and take his second 500 in a row. That I think he's the one with black magic. If Logano had it, he would have more 500s right now.
Yeah. Well, Cody, you've had about, I think, it's been exactly roughly 24 hours since that last lap wreck occurred, and how are you digesting it?
Yeah, I really think I expected there to be a lot of chaos on the final lap. We saw Riley Herb spin. Was afraid that he was going to come into the field and that was going to end the race prematurely, but he saved it. He was a-okay. And then they got down the backstretch, and you knew Custer probably wasn't going to help a Toyota. The only problem is he had Denny Hamlin's teammate Briscoe behind him, and that wasn't going to pan out for him either. So, you got 3 guys going for one spot. I also want to point this out though on that backstretch. I really think that we almost saw a 4 wide battle for the lead coming into
Mm-hmm.
3, with Reddick and Byron uh, using their momentum after Briscoe and Custer kind of split their ways. Um, they got a lot of momentum and they were charged on the outside, and it was them charging on the outside was the only way that they were able to squeeze through that wreck. But yeah, I really think that all the chaos on the last lap was expected. Um, Glad to see everyone got out of the car and everything. There was a lot of hard hits in that wreck. A lot of cars getting clipped from the bottom of the track, set straight up the track. Do want to point out Jimmy Johnson's wreck avoidance was perfect. And in fact, if Byron and Reddick had gotten any slower in that, Johnson could have possibly had a better chance at possibly even going for the win in that because he had so much momentum as he probably didn't really lift too much to that. It was almost like a Lightning McQueen esque going through all that. But nevertheless, chaos on Final Lap at Daytona in the last couple of years. It's it's bread and butter. You know what's going to happen. Um, all the leaders wrecked. Byron was 10th on the final restart, and entering the backstretch was ninth. And when the wreck happened, he was sixth. So yeah, it was just chaos, and didn't really expect anything else.
Yeah. Um, Before we move off the topic of the finish here, getting close to wrapping up this Daytona 500 discussion, King actually bringing up a point here that I align with. I don't know if everyone else aligns with, but he kind of brings up how he was disappointed that Byron won, and obviously he's elated, damn near emotional in his words about the Johnson P3. But the Byron win didn't do much for him. Didn't do much for me either. I say I'm not moved by it. The way he won both these 500s, where I'm not gonna say he didn't deserve him, but he deserved probably last year's more than this year's. He backed into it more so this year. Wasn't up front a lot this race. Wasn't never up front, but wasn't up front a lot. Driving a beautiful scheme. I'm not a Byron hater. It just doesn't move me. This back-to-back Daytona 500 wins. Um, like Denny Hamlin, the last driver to get back-to-back 500s. He kind of backed into that second consecutive one as well with the Newman incident. It's crazy. It's good TV when something completely unpredictable happens and a driver wins out of nowhere, but this one, my final takeaway is that it doesn't move me. Anyway, let's move on though. Wrapping up this Daytona 500 discussion, uh, how about we rate the race, Derek? And I'll give you the floor not only to rate the race first, but reintroduce the rating scale.
Yeah, so like the previous time when we did the Clash, we are we have 4 categories with racing product rating, excitement rating, the finish rating, and the overall rating. I think they're all very self-explanatory. We've went over this before on the Clash. So to start off with my racing product rating, I give it a 9 out of 10. I thought this Daytona Racing, and I'm not personally, I'm not a great super speedway type of watcher. It's not really something that I prefer to watch, but it's it was definitely really good for what it was worth. 9 out of 10. The excitement was also really high. I'll give that an 8 out of 10. Where there was a lot of moments during the race, like the Ryan Priest flip, the Logano Stenhouse incident, and a couple other wrecks that happened. Just a lot of good lane moving and just
Yeah.
good control overall. And for the finish rating, although it finished under caution, I'm going to give a little bit of slack here since most of the Daytona 500s have finished under caution.
Hmm.
I was given an 8 out of 10. I would have maybe given it like a 6 out of 10 with the caution, but considering it's like the norm for Daytonas, I feel like an 8 out of 10 for that finish was appropriate. So that rounds out my rating to an 8.67
All right.
overall.
Hopefully, Derek, you can keep up maybe with our averages as well. I'll
Yep,
actually take the reins here, flipping up the order a little bit. Racing product, excitement, and finish, correct, Derek?
correct.
And starting with racing product, I thought it was good. Amongst the best for next gen that we've seen at a super speedway, actually, is what I'd say when they weren't wrecking. I love seeing the 3 lanes form up very efficiently there during the run. Fuel strategy or not, that's definitely a topic perhaps for another time, but I think it was good. I think if you had a casual fan, for example, at the track, they had to enjoy what they were seeing. Same goes for on TV as well. And for that reason, I give the racing product a 9.2 out of 10. As for the excitement, it was up there as well. I like to rate that based off of how engaging is the race. Is there any dull moments? Is there any freight training? There really wasn't that much freight training. You always had racing, to say the least. Never a dull moment that race, never a boring moment, in my opinion, where you didn't really have to worry about something happening that directly affected the outcome of the race. And for that reason, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, a straight 9-0. I thought the excitement was pretty good. And then as for the finish, I like how Derek assessed it. I think that NASCAR did a great job letting it go green there, despite the wreck. But letting it go green after the wreck doesn't make it the best finish for me. It's still, I mean, if they had thrown out the caution, it wouldn't have changed anything anyway. The drivers would have finished in the position that they were, the ones that made it through the wreck. And so, since a wreck did happen, I much prefer a green flag run to the checkers. I mean, that's what's gave us that 2016 amazing finish in the 500. I have to give the finish a 4.7 out of 10. That does it for me. What's my average?
Uh, Sorry, can you say what your finish rating was?
4.7.
Okay, that is that divided by.
Not
Sorry,
to
one
put you on
second.
the
Divided by
spot,
two.
you know.
7.63. Sorry, I was a little late to it.
No problem. 7.3 for Mr. Zach.
6.3.
6.3.
7.63. Yes,
7.63. All right.
correct.
Cody.
Yeah, so I'm gonna do a little. I'll start off with excitement. Um, and I almost want to be biased with this because I want to go 10 because it's the season start and everything. But I'm gonna go realistic. I think I'm gonna go put 9.3. It's a Daytona 500, and as a NASCAR fan, this is the start of your season. This is all the hype that is brought into this race. Um, it almost pays off here once this green flag drops. I will admit, even though maybe it's not as good as when we were younger, the production just isn't the same.
Yeah.
I still
Doesn't have
feel
as much
like
aura.
yeah, I still feel like it is built up as an event as it should be. Um, so I give it a 9.3 for that. Racing product, I think every time we go to Super Speedway, we just get a little bit better, and they get a little bit more understanding of these cars here at Super Speedways. Um, Personally, I really do like the Speedway package, even though a lot of people call it pacing at 200 miles an hour. Uh, I enjoy it. I wasn't the biggest fan of the freight trains. So I really like the side by side. I don't care if there's half throttle. Your side by side, one bad bump, it could go wild and everything. So overall, though, I think the race was pretty good. We saw some full throttle three wide racing. I'm gonna have to go with an 8.6 for that. Really did like all that. And the finish, I kind of agree with Zach. I think it should have been reversed. I think the duel should have finished under green, and the race should have finished under caution, because Reddick really wasn't going to get past Byron. And if you threw a caution there, you get to the drivers quicker. As for the duel finish, you were 100 feet from the line, so um, I really think that kind of hurt a little bit. I didn't mind Byron winning. I'm not really a Byron hater. So I'd probably go 6.7 for the finish. It still was wild and everything, and there was still a lot of feel good stories at the end. So yeah. So what is my average, Mr. Smith?
You get a 8.20.
All right.
And Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. Well, I'll start with racing product here. I was pretty excited throughout the whole race. I was pretty hooked on it. I would give it a solid 9. Let's see, excitement. So I had to listen to a little bit of the race on MRN, so I'm gonna factor this in a little bit. And I just feel like listening on MRN, they do a good job, don't get me wrong, right? But Jeff Schriegel being gone, I feel like there's a big vacancy to be filled in there. I mean, maybe it'll take some time getting used to, but he's one of the voices for MRN that we've all been used to for the last, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. I don't know how long he was there, but that's gonna take a little getting used to. So I'm gonna say 9 for excitement as well. Finish, I think it could have been a little better. The problem with the next gen is you need a car behind you to build any sort of run, right? And Reddick not having anybody behind him, he couldn't have really done anything. Even if he got the Byron, he kind of would have just been stalled out right there behind him. So I think for that reason, 7.5.
And looking at the chat, uh, RN gives it a 7.8 on the racing product, gives it a 8 on the excitement, and a 9.5 on the finish. King gives the racing product a 9, a 8 on the excitement, and an 8 on the finish as well. That's our race ratings.
Marcus, what was I only heard 2 rings, I believe.
9, 9, 7.5.
Okay, it was another 9. And that runs up to 8.5. So
Okay.
Zach was the most less optimistic about this race, and I was the most optimistic according
Yeah.
to ratings.
All right. Glad you mentioned that as well. Let's move on and uh, give the floor to Cody for the return of turning my wrenches.
Yeah, and this is a big one here. I've thought about this a lot about today. This just as a fan and everything. And yesterday we watched a terrible flip with Ryan Preece. It just seems like these super speedways here, actually any track that's pretty fast here, we see these flips here. Last season we saw 4 total flips with Corey LaJoy twice, Tyler Reddick, and I'm missing somebody. Who else?
Josh Berry.
Josh
Josh
Berry.
Berry
That's
at
right. Yeah,
Daytona.
Josh Berry.
McDowell did a half
Um,
flip too.
yeah. So uh, my the everyone talks about the grass being taken away, and everyone talks about okay all the aerodynamics that come into this, and how do we prevent this? And I'm on the fence of saying that you can't prevent it. This is gravity.
Hmm.
You cannot throw a 200-mile-per-hour race car or a car going 200 miles an hour that is 1.5 tons. Just throw it on its side and expect the air not to get underneath it and take it aloft. I definitely think that the bottom of these cars have a lot to do with that. Very smooth, not many ridges. I think that could be something that NASCAR looks at in the future if they want to, fix this problem. Um, but if you want to stop these cars from flipping, then just sit in the short tracks. I mean, if that's all I mean, that's really what you're gonna have to do. This is a sport. The drivers understand the inherent risk every time they get in the cars. Um, Priest has been on the bad end of it a lot. I feel bad for him. We've seen him have when it comes to mine, 4 hits. Kansas in 2019 or 2020.
It was 2020.
Uh, and in the last couple years, it's been brutal for him in general. The Daytona flip in the fall race on the backstretch, which took away the grass, which was basically the race that took away the grass. The hit that he took with Larson earlier that season at Talladega, and then the flip here we saw last night. I I'm 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 really mad that everyone's complaining about this 24/7 and saying, we need to do better and everything. And this why won't this stop? Why can't we do this? And I don't know if these people just didn't take physics classes or science in general. I mean, this is gravity 101 or physics 101, I would say. You just can't expect this stuff not to happen when you're racing like this. Um, it's not gonna stop, and it really I don't say it shouldn't stop, but you're gonna tell a driver not to go for a win in the Daytona 500, or a win in general.
Hmm.
In these races, these wrecks happen late in races. These wrecks happen due to the cause of just drivers being aggressive. It's 4 laps to go in Daytona 500. You are not going to let off. You're not going to not push your way and shove your way for a win. It was like I said though, it was a freak accident. Bell hit him in the wrong, right in the front tire. The car got aloft. Um, that flat bottom. Eric got underneath that. Then he also hits Eric Jones on the left side, which takes the car up even more. And once his car got on the side, it was just on from there. It was like the flip was almost identical to Corey LaJoy's once it got on its side, um, or at least how it got up and over. Because Corey LaJoy's car, once it got on its side and just got a little bit of air under it, it was gone. We saw this with Ryan Newman for years, and I mean decades with Newman. How many times have we seen him in a terrible crash and a flip, or on the wrong side of a car flipping, from Daytona, all these races all those years. So I I I'm kind of tired of hearing about, oh man, we need to do something. If you want to do something different and you want to stop this stuff, then we're gonna have to stop going to super speedways. We're gonna have to stop going to tracks where you go over 150 miles an hour. Really, um, we've seen flips at we saw flips at Vegas. That was another one of those weird incidences where the car, really that was more the grass than anything. And the grass does have an issue at some tracks. You see Charlotte. First time we went to Charlotte with a Gen 7. Chris Buescher gets just on his side just enough, grabs the grass and goes tumbling on the front stretch. The first ever race we had in the Gen 6 or Gen 7 at Daytona, Harrison
Hmm.
Burton flips on the backstretch. Um, it's not going to stop. I don't even think this is the last flip we're going to see this year. Um, I really don't. I could almost guarantee that we'll see another one some other time, some during the season in the Cup Series. But you know, we talk about all this stuff and all the safety, and yes, there's more that we could do. I've heard some crazy things like try to install somehow put roof flaps on the bottom of the car, which I could see how maybe that would work. I don't know how really, but and all this stuff, but all it's just there's some stuff that happens and you can't I don't know. You can't not have it happen.
Yeah.
Some of this stuff is just it's just um the hand of God almost, I would say at times.
Yeah, the roof flaps on the bottom of the car kind of seems like a weird idea to me as well.
Yeah.
I
I
want
can.
to say, go ahead, Zach.
I was just gonna say I can assure you the NASCAR R&D department board is having a meeting this Monday trying to figure out what they need to do to prevent that. It's definitely at the front of their minds.
So,
Yeah, that car definitely went to the R&D center, and I'm sure the meetings that they've had throughout this week are going to be about keeping these cars on the ground. Drivers like if I'm Ryan Preach, yeah, I'd be fed up. This is the second time I've had these aren't just like your run of the mill flips. I mean,
mhm,
these are some hard hitting, I mean, absolutely ground pounding crashes. Um, you know, these aren't just like with Corey LaJoy at Michigan last year. That was more of what they would call a standard, just your standard flip. Both of the flips that Ryan Preece has had in the last year and a half are not your standard flips. These are some um, almost freak of nature type crashes that he's had. So I feel bad for him. Yeah, I do think NASCAR could do better in some instances, but to say that we're never going to build a car that's going to stay on the ground unless we bolt it to the ground.
right.
If
But
we get up to a certain speed and we get these cars at a certain angle, there's going to be air, there's going to be gravity, there's going to be physics involved. It's going to get aloft. You're going to see these cars fly. I mean, it was the same thing with the COT with the wing. So I think the biggest thing that maybe NASCAR needs to look at is the undercarriage. I mean,
yeah,
everyone talks about it looks like a die cast. You can't have, there's nothing there to stop the air from under going under the car and grabbing it. So yeah, that's
All right.
my wrenches, and it's been turned.
my point I want to make with the blowovers though is the main complaint is the frequency of them happening. Because if you think back to the Gen 6, as far as I can remember, there were 7 blowovers. You had Boyer, Austin Dillon, Chris Buescher, Matt Kenseth, McMurray, Larson, and Logano. Seven blowover within the span of 8 years. We're at 5 blowovers now, 5 crazy ones at that in the span of 3. We're like almost on track to beat what the previous record for the Gen 6 blowover wise was. And you got to look at the underbody. I mean, it's flat underneath. You can't expect air not to pick it up. Like the only option is I think removing the underbody, removing the diffuser and all that. That would help air like travel between different places, between all the exhaust systems and stuff down there to keep the car on the ground rather than lifting it up.
All right. Well, we heard some wrenches get turned, and King brings up a good question. We'll get to it before the end of the show, I promise, during open discussion. We are on the home stretch, and after a long and thorough Daytona 500 discussion, it's time to turn our gears off of that. We will stay temporarily on the topic, and I had to put someone on the spot. Is someone able to quickly pull up the
Yeah,
Fantasy
I'm getting
League
it up right now.
and screen share how those standings are looking? We have 10 members in there that all participated, and we want to give recognition to who's doing best after week one. And while we're on the topic, while we're waiting for Cody to pull it up, remember, if you're not in it, you can join it. It's called the Tune Up. That's the name of the fantasy league. You access NASCAR Fantasy through their website, and you go to the Fantasy tab. When you're there, you could search up the league, The Tune Up, as the show logo is named with the word The. and you look it up. The motto is checkers or records, and then most importantly, the password is NASCAR with only a capital N. The rest of the letters are lowercase. You can join up throughout the year, and we'd love more members. Number prize will be given out to the champion at league's end. So let's take a look here at Cody's screen, and you see the results. Derek Smith, one of our panelists, is leading after week one, just barely over Mr. PTP. And Derek, how do you feel about that?
I think his mic is muted.
Yeah, sorry, I muted by accident. But I felt so great about that, and I looked before the show and saw I was ahead by 3 points. I could tell my drivers did well because I took out Bush from my main drivers and put Kozlowski in, and that proved to help me by 16 points. And although my driver matchups weren't good, I think I lost 3 out of the 4 of them. My drivers still picked up the slack.
All right, Co, if you can go back to the league standings here just to look at everything else. It's Derek Smith, Mr. PTP, King there in third, myself in fourth, Cody in fifth, then Marcus, Nate, and Mark. Tyler and Shiny forgot to set a lineup. Good reminder to set your lineup as well. Pretty sure you could do it. Is it
It's every
tomorrow?
Tuesday, I
Yeah,
think, is
yeah,
when you can set your
tomorrow.
Every
lineups.
Tuesday it
Yeah.
opens.
So just make sure you don't forget to set your lineup if you're in the league. That's very costly as the season goes on if you just don't set a lineup. At least give yourself a chance. Come on now. Well, that's a look at the fantasy. And remember, keep your picks private. I think that's probably a good idea to do as well. If you can, don't be going showing your picks to everyone. I did that week one, and I don't want to do it anymore. So we'll see what happens after Atlanta. Speaking of Atlanta, we are pressed for time. We're going to be wrapping up the show here shortly. So without discussing Atlanta too much, how about we make some of our race picks? And I'll start with our traditional format: 2 winners, 1 underdog, and I'm actually going to start backwards. I know who my underdog is. I believe Corey LaJoy is racing as a part-timer again this week, and LaJoy is my underdog for Atlanta. It's come very close. They're almost won in 2022 at the summer race. Um, my winner pick is actually someone that I think can go back to back. I think Daniel Suarez is very good at the new configuration of Atlanta. He has ran good there before winning. He also almost went back to back, actually, if I remember right, being there in person at the summer race last year, the playoff race. I go to every Atlanta race. I'll be there this weekend as well. And I think Daniel Suarez is someone to look out for. I don't think I also get the chance to pick Daniel Suarez as much throughout the season, so I want to pick him here. My other winner pick, drivers that I think of that have done good at Atlanta, Ross Chastain comes to mind. And I'm not going Trackhouse right here, but I'm also just thinking for a track that's hard to predict, one of the super speedways or super speedway hybrid, as some might call, I just can't get into the trends too much. I just have to pick with who my gut is with. My gut tells me Trackhouse this week. Despite having a tough speed weeks at Daytona, I'm with Suarez and Chastain as my 2 picks. Dar, let me give it to you now.
Okay. I believe I got an idea of who I want to get here. So my first pick here, I'm gonna make a bold predicament here. Byron goes 2 in a row in the season.
Mhm.
Back-to-back super speedway wins. He's gonna somehow get extremely lucky, and maybe it will be another caution-related incident where a lot of the field wrecks. But no, he's really good at Atlanta as well. I believe he's won 2 times here at this
Yep.
configuration before. So I believe he can get a third time. So that's my main pick to win. My second pick to win, kind of a shot in the dark here, but Hamlin. We know him for how good he is at Daytona. Uh, and just overall, with Atlanta, it's a little bit different from Daytona, of course. There's more tire wear involved, but um, I feel like Hamlin can also has a great chance of winning here. He should have a good car to do it. And for my underdog pick, I had to real quickly just look at the drivers real quick just to give myself an idea. Let's go with the front row driver of Noah Gregson. I think he might be a good underdog selection for this race. and I just would like to see that number 4 car get back in victory lane.
All right, let's hear from you, Cody.
Yeah, I for my main pick, I'm gonna go with Blaney. Showed speed at Daytona, finished second there last year in that photo finish. He's been very fast there. The Penskes have always been pretty good here at the Super Speedway, so they usually have a pretty good program there. My next pick, I'm gonna go with Chris Buescher. Chris Buescher has been all right at the Super Speedways RFK. Feel like this is their season. They're really gonna break out here. I got a good feeling about them, and I don't know why this is for my underdog keeps coming to my mind. It's a shot in the dark. Shane Van Gisbergen. I know everyone thinks that he is going to be a guy that to watch out for on the road courses, but his super speedway presence in the last couple years has been very good. Ran well in the Xfinity Series at Daytona last year, finished third. Ran well at the Daytona Races, both in Cup and Xfinity. Um, if anyone's going to be a shot in the dark, I think it's going to be Van Gisbergen.
Mm-hmm.
And that leaves Marcus.
So based on last year, I'm gonna say Kyle Busch. I know it's biased, but he showed a lot of speed in both races at Atlanta last year. So I'm gonna say him. My second pick is gonna be Suarez, based on just how he's been at Atlanta overall. And I think this is definitely one of his races that he's looking forward to for trying to sneak a win in there, trying to help make a case for Trackhouse to keep him. Because like we were talking about, this could be it for Suarez this year. So he needs to do something to show that he's still there. And my underdog pick, I'm not like really sure who I'm gonna say for that. I mean, you got a lot of great drivers there. I'm gonna say Logano. He's a two-time winner. If he doesn't, usually the way it goes on super speedways is if he's not wrecking, he's up front. So I think we'll see him a little more. Um, as long as he's smart about it this week, I think we'll see him up front a bit.
Is Logano considered an underdog? I mean, I don't
I
know.
mean,
Very
I mean, if you consider the fact that he
That's
always
reaching.
wrecks him, I'm saying I'm going based off like how likely a driver is to finish the race this week. Logano, it's a very small chance he finishes, but he could finish.
Okay, I feel like you're just cheating here, getting a main driver
Yep,
Okay,
selection
fine.
again.
definitely
But
big
I'll
cheat.
make another. Let's see.
You get BJ McLeod by default.
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I'll go with JJ Yaley. JJ Yaley can make something work.
is he even gonna be racing this
Right.
week?
Yeah, he is. Yeah,
JJ
JJ
he's
Yaley's
got to make the
entering.
Oh,
field.
really? Oh, JT, okay.
He's racing in the 44 again.
I
All
do
Okay.
right.
feel bad for Yaley though. Bad Daytona, missed the Xfinity because of rain, and missed Daytona,
Yeah.
just couldn't get in.
The
I wonder.
season back marker.
I wonder what the betting odds are for him to win this race.
Imagine he actually does.
Paul doesn't even have
If you
betting
bet, make
odds.
sure you use BetMGM because they sponsor Kyle Busch. But yes,
We are not sponsored by
we are
BetMGM.
not
You know this,
sponsored by
guys.
them. I'm biased for my driver sponsors.
All right.
You probably don't even use BetMGM.
I'm not even old enough to use.
Oh, great! There we go.
Yep.
All right. Well, that takes us to the end of the show. And actually, before we move on to chat room, let's look at King's picks here. He made a pick. He picked Blaney, picked LaJoy as his underdog, and he said Bubba as a sleeper. I like those picks. Those are all good super speedway racers.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I mean, why didn't I want to pick Bubba now? I can't go back though. Bubba is good. Is a good pick for Atlanta.
Yeah,
For
that was a
me,
good pick.
yeah. All right. Well, go into our final segment here as we always end our shows, and that's where we look back at the chat room, make sure we got to all of the questions and good talking points. And King left one here that I promised I'd get back to, where he had a question, and we appreciate King sending it in. I mean, King has been, for all of our episodes where we've had a lot of good viewership, King has been the MVP out of nowhere here in episode 4, chatting all session long, and he ends it off with a question here, bringing up the issues with the cautions, he says, on the last lap. In the races from the past weekend, do you feel like they should bring back overtime line or systems similar to it? Ooh, I'd like to start. Um, I saw someone's idea, and it aligns with an idea I came up with after watching the duel finish, where it's kind of like you create an overtime line, but for calling cautions on the last lap, and like you put it out of turn 4 or something, or maybe make it somewhere like that, where you utilize how the overtime line was utilized back in 2016, except when they pass that line, you can't call a caution when it's the last lap, when the leaders pass it. I do think it's different to enforce when it's a non-drafting track versus a drafting track, so that's something to consider there. But I think you got to look at something, and NASCAR kind of presented a new way to approach it as well with how they call the finish of the Daytona 500. They let them race back. I think they even, what I saw is that they deployed safety vehicles to make sure they get to the scene, and then they called a caution when the leaders got back to the line. Once they crossed the finish line, called a caution so they know that to slow down. That's an interesting way to approach it. I kind of like it. That's my
Mhm.
thoughts on that. How about you, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, if you said the safety vehicles were going up before the caution.
That's what I think I heard. Can't
Okay.
confirm it.
That's what I've heard as well. Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting to think. I mean, that's not really standard protocol. I don't think they usually wait till that caution light goes on, but I feel like it's kind of human instinct to do that. But going on King's question, I think I want to bring up the point. I think it was the Xfinity race where they wrecked coming from two to go to, and they crossed the line for the white flag, and the caution came up pretty much right as that happened, and the
Mhm.
race was over. I feel like there should be a certain point on the white flag where, uh, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's
Ooh.
happened before, but have a line just like the overtime line where, you know, you can have that caution, uh, not be called or be called, and
Mhm.
that proves in that Xfinity race.
Yeah. So, like I think I know where you're going with this, Star. You say like they have to get to a certain point on the track after taking the white for the race to be official.
Right. It just ended up being a bad finish, just because we could have had another restart, but
Hmm.
we were just caught across the line for a white flag.
I like that. I think the
Yeah.
overtime line that was for two to go, right? Like once they got to that.
That was for
Yeah.
Yeah,
two
yeah,
to
yeah.
go.
It was which that was where it really messed up a lot of things.
Yeah. All right.
Mhm.
I like that. How about you, Marcus? Any thoughts on this question?
I think if they do it, I would say from the time they get to the start finish line to the time they go to the exit of turn two is where the caution zone should be for super speedways. Or well, for Daytona and maybe Atlanta at least, right? Because you need time.
Mhm.
If you go on the backstretch, at that point, boys have at it, go back to the line and race. But if it's on the front stretch or if it's in one and two, like that, they're gonna be still going fast at that point. They need to be able to slow down and not run into traffic. Talladega, I would say a little bit like down the backstretch is where I would draw the line, just because that's where the start finish line's a little wonky at Talladega. So you gotta like mess with it a little bit on the super speedways, but I think if they did something similar to that, if they made it to where more than half the lap you can race around, that would be good for us.
And Cody.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I was thinking of kind of what that photo that Zach you showed me was. There needs to be a line on the entrance of three on each of these super speedway tracks. Um, I know Talladega may be a little bit of the exception. Um, but once they make it to there, if the wreck happens after that line, let them race it out. If it happens before, caution. Pretty plain and simple. I mean, pretty clear cut if you ask me by doing that. It only obviously applies for the white flag. So
Hmm.
I don't know. It's a good question though. Uh, I, I don't know if we'll see anything really change. Maybe a little more consistency in how they do it, but I think it also depends on the wreck too. I mean, if the wreck on the backstretch was Ryan Preece again, something like that. If Ryan Preece's crash happened on the last lap, yeah, you would have seen a yellow, no doubt. But a bunch of the cars stacking up and wrecking like they usually do, yeah, just let them race it out and
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Shout out to King and RN for being frequent chatters here towards the end of the show. and all the rest of you that joined along. Once again, it's very nice to have consistently at least 5 people watching us, and we usually, every single show, get over 10 at some point. We're very appreciative of our audience. We're very appreciative of those that have joined in. Oh, we got one more chat right here before we wrap up.
Mhm.
It's from none other than the older Marcus Vanderlee.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
Yeah. Basically agreeing with what I think with what I was saying pretty much is just letting them race back to the line. If they're far enough where it won't affect them. Because fun fact, he was right. I'm pretty sure he was right there in the pits at the duels when the caution got called and Eric Jones was about to win. Confirming the chat if I'm wrong, but he saw that all happen in person. I was kind of talking to him like that was kind of weird how they did that.
yeah. Well, we appreciate you guys joining us once again. Shout out to my panel every single episode so far. It's been Marcus, it's been Cody, it's been Derek, and it's been myself. This is Zach Tefelsky saying so long, and we'll be here once again next week after I myself co-attend the Atlanta race in person. I'll hopefully be able to bring a nice and interesting perspective back to episode 5 of the tune-up. 8 p.m. East, Mondays, new episodes of our podcast. Uh, Possibly getting on Spotify in the future. Of course, I'll bring home the news if anything occurs there. For now, take care of yourselves, be good,